I froze behind the bar of my mountain tavern when Trevor, the Alpha King I'd spent 7 years hiding from, walked through my door with his warriors. His amber eyes, the mark of royal bloodline, locked onto our son Ronald, sitting innocently at the corner table with his wooden sword. The resemblance was devastating. The same silver-streaked dark hair, the same powerful build already showing in a 7-year-old's frame, the same commanding presence. 7 years of carefully constructed lies and a false identity crumbled as recognition dawned across Trevor's scarred face. His warriors filled the doorway. There was no escape. When Ronald looked up and asked who the fierce man in armor was, I tried to lie, but Trevor's voice cut through the room like a blade. He demanded to know the boy's age, and when I stammered that he was 6, Trevor pulled aside his collar to reveal the crescent-shaped birthmark that every male in his bloodline carried. The same mark I knew Ronald had on his shoulder. The Alpha King had found his heir, and the reckoning I'd feared for 7 years had finally arrived. 7.5 years ago, I smelled of onions and wood smoke more than Wolf. The royal kitchens were always hot, always loud, always full of people who never bothered to learn my name. I was just Girl, or Omega. A pair of hands to scrub pots and haul water, too small and too quiet to be anything else. My world was stone floors, simmering stews, and the constant clatter of metal on metal. The only view of the sky I had was a thin slice through the high window above the ovens. The first time Trevor walked in, the air changed before I even saw him. Conversation dropped one voice at a time, like candles being snuffed out. A low hush rolled through the room, the way it did when storms gathered in the mountains. I turned from the basin, my hands still buried in sudsy water, and saw him framed in the doorway, broad shoulders wrapped in dark leather, hair braided back from a hard, beautiful face, amber eyes taking in everything. The Alpha King, my king. He shouldn't have been anywhere near the kitchens. Kings belonged in war rooms and throne halls, not standing between hanging pots and sacks of flour. Yet there he was, tracking the room with slow, assessing curiosity until his gaze landed on me. I dropped my eyes so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. "Back to work," the head cook barked, voice shaking. Everyone scrambled. I tried to make myself smaller, wished I could melt into the stones. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure he could hear it over the crackle of the hearth. Bootsteps crossed the floor. Stopped. Right in front of me. "What is your name?" His voice was low and rough, carrying that alpha command that made the wolf inside me flatten to her belly. I swallowed, fingers gripping the edge of the basin. "Lillian, Your Majesty." "Look at me." "Lillian." Every instinct screamed no, but my body obeyed. When I met his gaze, it felt like being caught in a snare. Up close, his eyes were even more intense. Molten gold ringed in darker amber. A faint scar cut through one eyebrow. There was faint stubble on his jaw, a shadow that made him look tired and feral and far too real. "How long have you served here?" he asked. 3 years, sire." "Family?" "None." The word came out too quickly, too flat. His eyes flickered, something like understanding passing through them. He studied me a heartbeat longer, nostrils flaring ever so slightly as if he were scenting the air between us. My wolf trembled, then rose, pressing forward in my chest with a strange, aching curiosity. Then he nodded once, turned, and left. I told myself it meant nothing. Kings asked questions. Kings noticed the people who worked for them. It was only because I'd been standing closest to the door. It had to be. But he came back the next day. And the next. Sometimes he spoke to the cook, sometimes to the steward. But his eyes always found me, lingering a fraction of a second too long. Once, when he passed behind me, the barest brush of his scent, pine, cold steel, and the faintest hint of something wild, hit the back of my throat so hard I nearly dropped the pot I was carrying. 3 weeks later, I found him waiting in the herb garden at dusk. I'd gone out with a basket for rosemary, grateful for a breath of cool air after hours beside the fire. The sky was painted in streaks of violet, the first stars just beginning to pierce the dark. I rounded the corner and froze. Trevor stood by the stone wall, cloak thrown back, bracers dark against his forearms. He looked less like a king and more like the warrior the songs whispered about, shadowed and dangerous. I started to back away. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, I didn't—" "Stay," he said, and something in the single word brushed along my skin like a command. Not the crushing force of alpha power he used on the pack, but a softer pull, a coaxing thread my wolf wanted to follow. He picked a sprig of rosemary, rolling it between his fingers. "You avoid my eyes when I speak to you. I'm an Omega," I said, staring at his boots. "It's not my place to—" "And yet you just argued with your king." Heat rushed into my cheeks. I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" He huffed a quiet laugh. Interesting. No one had ever called me that before. For a long moment, there was only the chirp of crickets and the distant murmur of the fortress settling for the night. Then he asked, very simply, "Do you know how to read?" I blinked. "No, sire." "Would you like to?" I finally looked up, because I couldn't not. "Why?" "Because your mind is too sharp to waste peeling potatoes." His gaze held mine, steady and unflinching. And because when an alpha's wolf notices an Omega this stubbornly determined to make herself invisible, he gets curious. My heart stuttered. My wolf pressed harder against my ribs, ears perked. "I'm just a servant," I whispered. "For now." He stepped closer, and the world narrowed to the space between us. "Meet me here tomorrow night. After the last bell, if you wish to learn. If you wish to learn. If you wish to be near me." The words weren't spoken, but I felt them anyway. I didn't sleep that night. I turned his offer over and over in my mind until dawn bled gray through the kitchen windows. Every caution I'd learned as an Omega, keep your head down, never draw attention, never tempt an alpha, screamed that this was madness. But when the last bell tolled the next night, I was already in the garden. He was waiting with a small stack of worn books and a single wildflower, a pale blue blossom I'd only ever seen on the highest mountain slopes. He held it out like an apology. "For you," he said. "You spend all day making everyone else's lives easier. Someone should bring you a small piece of beauty." No one had ever said anything like that to me. My fingers shook as I took the flower. It smelled like snowmelt and summer at the same time. That night, he taught me the first letters of our language. His hands were rough and warm when they covered mine to guide the charcoal across the parchment. Whenever our shoulders brushed, static raced along my skin. My wolf paced inside my chest, restless and alert. We met again the next night. And the next. He brought more books, more wildflowers. He asked about my childhood, about the parents I barely remembered, about the way the head cook snapped when she was tired, and how the steward skimmed a little coin off every delivery. He listened like every word I said mattered. One night, he asked, "Do you know what happens when an alpha finds his fated mate?" I swallowed, throat suddenly dry. "The old stories say the bond strikes like lightning, that the wolf recognizes what the man doesn't. Sometimes," he said softly, "the man knows first." My pulse roared in my ears. "Why are you telling me this?" He stepped closer, so close I could see the darker ring around his irises, the faint hint of stubble along his jaw. "Because the moment I stepped into that kitchen and caught your scent, my wolf went still. Because every time you look away from me, he snarls. Because I haven't slept a full night since without dreaming of you." The world tilted. "I'm an Omega," I breathed. "Kings don't bond with Omegas. Kings obey the moon like everyone else." His hand rose, hovering near my cheek but not quite touching. "Lillian, you are my fated mate." The words slammed into me like a physical blow. My wolf surged, howling with wild, terrified joy. Something inside my chest snapped tight, a tug I'd never felt before, tying me to him in an invisible line that hummed with heat. I should have refused. I should have run even then. Instead, under the full moon that rose above the fortress walls 2 nights later, I went to him. We met in a secluded glade just beyond the outer wall, where the trees grew thick and the air smelled of pine and cold earth. The moonlight turned his braids silver, his bare chest all hard lines and scars. My hands shook as he reached for me, but the moment his skin met mine, the bond snapped into place. It was like being set on fire from the inside. Not pain, never pain, but an overwhelming flood of sensation. His joy, his hunger, his possessive, reverent awe crashed through me, echoing my own. Our wolves rose and twined, howling to the moon. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt claimed, cherished, chosen. For 2 months after that, I lived in secret chambers above his war room, hidden passages and coded knocks, the only things separating my old life from my new. I learned what it meant to be loved by an alpha who could crush armies, and yet brushed my hair with careful fingers at night. He brought maps to bed and traced borders on my skin, asking what I thought of trade routes and patrol shifts. He told me things he said he'd never told anyone about the weight of the crown, the loneliness of command, the fear of failing the pack. I started to believe I had a future, that one day he'd tell the council, weather their outrage, and take me as his queen. Then Marcus returned from the borderlands and everything shattered. It was late, the fortress mostly quiet, the moon a thin sliver in the sky. I woke to the sound of male voices beneath the floor, muffled but sharp-edged with tension. Trevor had left our bed an hour earlier, pressing a kiss to my forehead and telling me to sleep. I should have stayed where I was. Instead, I pulled on one of his shirts and slipped into the narrow servant's stair, easing down to the gap behind the war room tapestry where I'd once watched him plan battles with his generals. I pressed my ear to the crack. "She knows too much," Marcus was saying, his voice smooth and cold. "An Omega with that information is a liability, brother. If the Southern Alphas learn you've been whispering strategy into a servant's ear, they'll tear you apart in council." My blood turned to ice. Trevor's voice came next, lower, rougher. "She's loyal." "Loyal now," Marcus said, "but fear is a blade others can sharpen. All it takes is one threat to her life and she'll sing your secrets to anyone who listens. You want to keep your throne? You cannot afford that risk." Silence. Long, heavy, suffocating. When Trevor spoke, his voice sounded like stone grinding on stone. "What do you suggest?" "She needs to be removed," Marcus said softly. "Permanently. Before word spreads. Before anyone realizes you've made such a foolish attachment." My hand flew to my stomach, to the faint swell only I knew the meaning of. A life pulsed there, new and fragile. Our life. I waited for Trevor's denial, for his fury, for the growl that meant his wolf was about to rip someone apart. Instead, after another terrible pause, I heard him say, "You're right." The world went quiet. "I'll handle it," he added. "No one else touches her." My breath stopped. The edges of my vision blurred. I stumbled back from the wall, one hand yanking the shirt tighter around me, the other clutching my belly as if I could shield the pup from words. "You're right. I'll handle it." The Alpha King had agreed his Omega mate was a liability. Pregnant and suddenly very certain I was going to die. I did the only thing I'd ever been good at. I ran. I ran with nothing but the clothes on my back and 17 silver coins sewn into the hem of my skirt. The first night, I made it to the southern border villages before my legs gave out. I slept in a barn, shivering in the straw, one hand pressed to my belly where the tiny spark of life pulsed steady and terrifying. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow could have been one of Trevor's scouts. By dawn, I was moving again. For 3 weeks, I kept to the back roads and forest paths, avoiding the main trade routes where royal patrols traveled. I bought passage on merchant carts with old men who didn't ask questions. I traded my shoes for a worn cloak in a border town. I ate whatever I could afford, which wasn't much. The pregnancy made everything harder, the exhaustion, the nausea, the way my wolf whimpered constantly for her mate. I ignored her. I had to. The blizzard hit 2 months after I fled, in a village so small it didn't have a name. I'd been working in the tavern kitchen for 3 weeks, keeping my head down, my belly hidden under loose aprons. But the contractions started during the dinner rush, sharp and vicious, doubling me over behind the wash basin. The tavern keeper's wife took one look at me and shook her head. "You're not having that baby here," she said, not unkindly. "Old Marta lives at the edge of the woods. She's a healer. Go now, before the snow gets worse." I stumbled through drifts that came up to my knees, following a path I could barely see. The wind screamed through the trees. My wolf was frantic, clawing at me to shift, to run, to find safety. But shifting while pregnant was dangerous, and I was too weak anyway. Marta's cottage appeared like a miracle. Smoke rising from the chimney, firelight glowing through frost-covered windows. The old woman opened the door before I could knock, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside. "You're early," she said, guiding me to a bed piled with furs. "Or you've been traveling too hard. Either way, this baby's coming tonight." I gave birth as the storm raged outside, biting down on leather to keep from screaming. Marta's hands were steady and sure, her voice calm as she talked me through each wave of pain. When Ronald finally slipped into the world, tiny and perfect and wailing, I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe. "A boy," Marta said, wrapping him in clean cloth. "Strong lungs, good color. He'll live." She placed him in my arms, and I stared down at the tiny face already so much like his father it hurt. The same dark hair with silver threading through it. The same shape to his eyes, even though they were still that newborn blue. My heart cracked open and remade itself around him in the same instant. "What will you name him?" Marta asked. "Ronald," I whispered. "After my father, who died when I was 3. After a man too distant to be dangerous. Ronald Thorne, my mother's family name, not mine, not Trevor's, something that couldn't be traced." Marta asked no questions about the father. She let me stay through the winter, teaching me to care for an infant, to nurse him, to soothe his cries. When spring came, I left coin on her table and disappeared again. For 2 years, Ronald and I moved like ghosts. I worked in kitchens because it was what I knew, scrubbing pots in taverns and inns, keeping to the shadows. Ronald learned to walk in cramped back rooms that smelled of ale and smoke. He learned to talk while I worked. His first words, "Mama," and "No," whispered while I hauled buckets of water. Every time someone looked at him too long, we moved. Every time I caught the scent of wolf on the wind, we packed and left before dawn. I taught him young to hide what he was. When his eyes flashed amber during a tantrum, I covered them and whispered, "Never let them see, baby. Never." When his baby teeth came in sharper than they should have been, I told him to smile with his mouth closed. When he shifted for the first time at 18 months far too early, the mark of powerful bloodline, I held his tiny wolf form and cried into his fur. He was beautiful and impossible and so dangerous to both of us. Millhaven found us by accident. I'd been traveling north, away from the territories I knew Trevor controlled, when our cart broke an axle half a day's walk from the village. The driver left us there with apologies and our meager bags. Ronald was 3 by then, curious and exhausting, and asking 1,000 questions I couldn't answer. We walked into Millhaven as the sun set, and I felt something in my chest ease for the first time in years. It was remote, isolated, the kind of place even merchants rarely visited because the mountain roads were too rough. Most villagers were human or dormant wolves who'd never experienced a shift. No one here would recognize an alpha's heir. The tavern was called the Stag's Head, and it was falling apart. The owner, a grizzled old man named Cyrus, sat outside whittling when we arrived. He looked me up and down, then at Ronald clinging to my skirts. "You running from something or to something?" he asked. I nearly bolted. But something in his eyes was kind, tired but kind. "Running," I admitted quietly. He nodded. "Thought so. You have that look." He went back to his whittling. "I need help in the kitchen. Room and board. Small wage. Interested?" I should have been suspicious, should have asked questions, but Ronald was hungry and exhausted, and I was out of options. "Yes," I said. We stayed. A year later, Cyrus called me to his bedside. He was dying, had been dying slowly since we arrived, his lungs failing. He had no children, no family, nothing but the tavern that had been his life. "I'm leaving it to you," he rasped. "You've earned it, worked harder than anyone I've ever seen. And that boy," he smiled faintly, "that boy deserves a home." I cried when he died. For the first time since leaving Trevor, I let myself grieve for Cyrus, for the life I'd lost, for the mate bond that still pulled at me like a barely healed wound. I renamed the tavern the Silver Wolf. A bitter joke. A reminder. A dare to fate. And for 7 years, we lived there. I built a reputation as a widow whose husband died in the border wars, a tragic backstory that explained why I raised Ronald alone. I taught him to read and write. I taught him the pack histories and whispers late at night. I taught him to control his shifts, to hide his strength, to never show what he could do. "Why can't I play rough with the other boys?" he asked once, frustrated after I'd scolded him for nearly breaking another child's arm. "Because you're special," I told him, brushing silver-streaked hair from his forehead. "And special things have to be careful." He accepted it because he was young, because he trusted me. But every year, he looked more like Trevor. Every year, the resemblance became harder to hide. Every year, I looked over my shoulder, waiting. 7 years of peace. 7 years of fear. 7 years that ended the moment the Alpha King walked through my door. The door shut behind the last patron with a soft thud, and the tavern fell into a silence I had never heard within these walls. Trevor didn't shout. He didn't need to. One low command, one flash of alpha power, and the handful of villagers who'd been nursing their drinks scattered like frightened birds. Now it was just us. Me behind the bar, my hands braced on the worn wood. Him in the center of the room, leather and steel and storm, his warriors posted at the doors like shadows. "Talk," he said. My throat went dry. The word carried more weight than a roar. My wolf flattened, belly to the floor of my mind, shaking. I forced my fingers to unclench from the bar and stepped out from behind it, the air thick with his scent, pine and steel, and the faint, agonizing note of home. "Not here," I managed. "Ronald." "At the back," he cut in, with one of my men standing between him and every door. "He's safe. For now. For now." The words twisted like a blade. I moved to the wobbly table by the window, the one where Ronald liked to sit and watch the road. My knees threatened to give out, so I lowered myself carefully into the chair. Trevor didn't sit. He towered over me, shadows clinging to the angles of his face. "Start at the beginning," he said. "And don't lie to me again, Lillian." Hearing my name on his tongue after 7 years nearly undid me. I locked my gaze on a knot in the wood between us and dragged in a shaky breath. "I heard you," I said. 7.5 years ago, in the war room, you and Marcus." His jaw tightened. "You were talking about an Omega who knew too much. Marcus said she was a liability, that rival packs could use her. He said she needed to be removed permanently." My voice wobbled on the last word. "You asked what he suggested. He told you to eliminate her and you agreed. You said you'd handle it yourself." Silence, heavy, suffocating. "I was your secret," I whispered. "I was the Omega you'd confided in. Who else could it have been?" I risked a glance up. Fury still burned in his eyes, but beneath it, beneath the amber fire, I saw something else. Shock, pain. "Is that what you thought?" His voice came out low, hoarse. "That I stood in that room and planned your murder? What was I supposed to think?" My hands trembled on the tabletop. "I was pregnant, Trevor. You hadn't told the council about me. I was a nameless Omega, hidden above your war room. I heard you agree she had to be removed. I heard you say no one else would touch her. I thought you meant me." He swore under his breath, the sound raw and ugly. He dragged a hand over his face, then braced his palms on the table and leaned in. "The Omega in that conversation," he said slowly, "was Marcus's mistress." I blinked. The words didn't make sense at first, like he'd switched to a language I didn't speak. "What?" "She was feeding information to the Southern Pack," he said. "Troop movements, guard rotations, trade routes. Marcus was too arrogant to see it until I put the pieces together." My stomach lurched. "Marcus wanted her dead," Trevor continued, eyes locked on mine. "He argued that execution was the only way to prove to the council that betrayal had consequences. I refused. I exiled her instead, stripped her of rank and sent her beyond the borders." He straightened, laughter breaking from his chest with no humor at all. "You think I would risk the throne, the entire Northern Territories, just to keep a kitchen servant warm at night, but then turn around and kill my own mate because she knew where I kept my maps?" I flinched. The sarcasm stung, but beneath it I heard something worse. Hurt, deep and old. "I heard you agree," I said weakly. "I agreed that she was a liability," he snapped. "That someone who had already betrayed us couldn't be allowed near the war room again. I never agreed to have her killed, and even if I had..." His voice broke. "Even if I'd been that cruel to a traitor, do you truly believe I'd put you in the same category?" My mouth opened, closed. Years of fear and certainty crumbled under the weight of his words. "You disappeared," he said quietly. The anger drained from his voice, leaving something hollow. "I woke up and you were gone. No scent, no note, nothing. I thought you'd been taken at first. I tore the fortress apart looking for you. I put scouts on every road, questioned every merchant who'd left within a week." My chest ached. I'd imagined him barely noticing the empty bed. "You didn't find me," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. His eyes went cold and distant, staring past me at some memory I wasn't part of. "I spent 2 years looking," he said. 2 years sending trackers into every village, following the ghost of your scent across half the kingdom. The bond was relentless. It kept pulling me toward you and never quite getting there." He huffed out a breath that might once have been a laugh. "My beta thought I was going mad," the council whispered behind my back. "They told me a mate would make me weak, and when you vanished, they said they were right." His gaze snapped back to mine. "I refused to believe you'd left. I told myself you'd been taken, that someone had forced you." His throat worked as he swallowed. "After the second winter, When every trail had gone cold, I realized there was only one explanation left. His eyes shone, not with alpha fire this time, but with something that made my own chest burn. You ran, on your own, without a word, which meant either I'd done something unforgivable, or you never trusted me at all. My vision blurred. Trevor. He slammed his palm against the table so hard the wood jumped. I flinched back. Do you have any idea what it did to me? He demanded. The alpha rolled off him in waves now, not directed, not controlled, just raw power bleeding through cracked restraint. To feel the bond tearing at me every day, while I imagined you dead in a ditch? To finally accept that you were alive and had chosen to cut me out, rather than speak a single word? The mate bond pulsed between us, a live wire sparking with pain on both ends. I pressed my hand to my sternum, as if I could press it down. I was trying to keep our child safe, I said, the confession ripped from me. I was already carrying when I left. The room went silent. Trevor stared at me, every muscle gone still. The warriors at the door shifted, glancing over, sensing the shift in the air. Say that again, he said, very softly. I was pregnant, I whispered. When I ran, I found out the day before I heard you and Marcus. I thought you'd kill me to protect the pack, and I couldn't let our pup die with me. I couldn't. How old? He cut in. His voice was nothing now, just breath and razor. My mouth opened, the lie I'd told earlier stumbling to my tongue out of habit, but there was nowhere left to hide. 7, I said. He turned 7 at the last harvest moon. His eyes closed. For a moment, all the fearsome power, all the armor, all the kingly bearing fell away, and he was just a man who'd been broken one time too many. 7 years, he murmured. 7 years. He opened his eyes again, and the grief there was worse than any rage. 7 years of first shifts, he said, voice barely above a whisper, of teaching him how to ride, how to hunt, how to throw a blade. 7 years of birthdays, of festival nights, of scraped knees and nightmares and stories by the fire. 7 years of hearing my son's laugh, of watching him grow. Every sentence hit like a fist. I could barely breathe. You stole that from me, he said, and there was no heat in the words now, just cold, deadly certainty. Because you heard half a conversation and decided your fear meant more than our bond. Tears burned hot tracks down my cheeks. I thought you'd chosen the pack over me. I would have died for you, he said. I would have burned the fortress to the ground before letting anyone touch a hair on your head. You were my mate. You still are, damn you. The bond thrummed, answering his claim with a desperate, traitorous joy. He pushed away from the table, drawing himself up to his full height. The king was back in his posture, in the hard set of his jaw. Ronald is the heir to the Northern Territories, he said. The blood of Alpha Kings runs in his veins. Out there, he's a vulnerable pup in a village that can't defend him. In the capital, he will be trained, guarded, respected. But I am not asking, he snapped. You will return to the capital with me, both of you. I'll announce him as my son and heir. The council will have no choice but to accept it. My mind raced. The council, the elders who'd always looked at me like I was dirt under their boots. The laws I'd grown up hearing, whispered like warnings around nighttime fires. An Omega who hid an heir. A mate who fled her alpha. There were punishments for that. Severe ones. They'll take him from me, I whispered. Trevor's eyes narrowed. No, he said, and there was iron in the word. I won't allow it. But if you fight me on this, if you try to run again, if you force me into a public battle over custody. He shook his head once. You know how it will look. An Omega who kidnapped the Alpha King's son and hid him for 7 years? No council in any territory would side with you. My stomach plummeted. He was right. And we both knew it. You're giving me no choice, I said. I'm giving you the only chance you have, he replied. Come with me on your feet, Lillian, as Ronald's mother, as my mate. Don't make me drag you back as anything less. The mate bond pulsed, pulling, pleading. Behind the door at the back of the tavern, I could faintly hear Ronald's laughter, unaware of the storm about to tear his world apart. For 7 years, I'd run from this moment. There was nowhere left to go. Trevor's camp waited like a crouching beast beyond the village edge, a ring of shadow and steel against the dark line of the trees. I almost turned back twice on the walk there. Every step away from the safety of my tavern felt like walking into the mouth of a predator. But Ronald was asleep in his small bed above the kitchen, guarded by 2 of Trevor's warriors and a third posted outside his window. Running wasn't possible anymore. Negotiating was all I had left. The guards at the perimeter scented me before I stepped into the torchlight. They stiffened, then dipped their heads slightly, glancing past me toward the village. "He's expecting you," one said, jerking his chin toward the largest tent in the center. Even his deference shook me. Omegas didn't get nods from royal warriors. Queens did. Mates did. I wasn't sure what I was anymore. Trevor's scent hit me before the flap did clean pine, cold steel, and the darker undercurrent of alpha power that had haunted my dreams for 7 years. My hand shook as I lifted the canvas and stepped inside. The tent wasn't what I expected. No luxuries, no silk-draped cushions or polished furniture. Just a war table scarred by years of use, maps pinned with metal markers, weapons laid out with clinical precision. A single lantern hung from the center pole, casting Trevor's face in sharp planes of light and shadow. He didn't look like a king just then. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "You came," he said. "I had to," I answered. My voice sounded small in the canvas hollow. "We need to talk about Ronald. About what happens next. That's exactly what we're going to talk about." He gestured to the table. "Come here." I forced my legs to move, the mate bond humming low and restless under my skin as I drew closer. The surface of the table was littered with parchment maps, letters, sketches, not just battle plans, faces, names. Trevor picked up one page and turned it toward me. "Do you recognize him?" My breath caught. Rough charcoal lines shaped a familiar profile, a round-cheeked man with a thinning crown and a gap between his front teeth. "The honeycake merchant," I whispered. "From Lowfield. He comes through every few months." "Came," Trevor corrected. Past tense. "Why do you have a sketch of him?" "Because he worked for Marcus," Trevor said, his amber gaze locked on mine. "He's one of at least 6 spies your dear brother-in-law has had in Millhaven." The word brother-in-law sliced through me with bitter irony. I shook my head, denial rising like bile. "No. He barely stayed an hour each time. He just bought stock, sold sugar and flour, and watched your son," Trevor cut in. "Watched you, watched the tavern, watched who came and went. I captured him 3 weeks ago on a border road. He was carrying this." He slid another parchment forward. This one was a letter, the handwriting cramped and hurried. I didn't recognize the script, but a few words jumped out at me like blood on snow. "Boy, 7 winters, displays alpha strength, unguarded. Mother believes herself safe." My lungs forgot how to work. "What is this?" "Reports," Trevor said. "From your village to Marcus. This one is 3 months old, the first time Ronald's existence crosses his desk." I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "How long have you known? That he suspected?" Trevor's mouth tightened. 4 months. "That he had confirmed it?" He tapped the letter. "Since this." He didn't give me time to process. He laid down another sketch. A woman with a severe braid and a soft, patient mouth. A man with kind eyes and calloused hands. The new couple who'd moved into the cottage across the lane last spring. "The Kellers?" My voice cracked. They help with firewood when the snows are bad. Their boy plays with Ronald." "They don't have a boy," Trevor said flatly. "The child is borrowed from a relative when needed. They're good actors, Lillian. Marcus pays well." I stared at the drawing, nausea rising. Every shared loaf of bread, every neighborly smile, every mended fence was suddenly a lie. "And this one?" Trevor slid the last page forward, without looking away from me. The healer. Short, round, with a cloud of curly hair and quick, clever eyes. She'd treated Ronald's fever last spring, soothing my panic with easy competence. She'd given him sweets after checking his heartbeat, smiling fondly when he'd stubbornly refused to rest. I swallowed hard. "You're telling me she..." Checked his pulse, his temperature, his teeth, Trevor said quietly, and smelled his blood. "An alpha heir's blood is distinctive." She wrote Marcus an enthusiastic report about how strong and promising the boy seemed. I wanted to sit, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stood there staring at the trio of betrayals laid out like offerings, feeling my world tilt. "All this time," I whispered. "They were watching us. Waiting." Trevor's jaw flexed. "Gathering information, drawing maps of your tavern and rooms above it, tracking Ronald's habits. There's a pattern to the market days he visits. the paths he takes to the river, the nights you close early. I dragged my gaze to the final parchment he pointed to. This one wasn't a letter. It was a sketch of my tavern, seen from above with arrows and notes scrawled around it. Back alley, kitchen door, ladder access to roof, sleep space here. The space marked with a circle was Ronald's bed. My vision blurred at the edges. The mate bond snapped taut inside me as fear punched through my chest. Marcus is planning to take him. It wasn't a question. Trevor's eyes were pure gold now, his wolf too close to the surface. Within days, he said. The moons are favorable. Pack on edge from my sudden departure. Council distracted. You isolated and unsuspecting. Rage pulsed through the bond from his side, hot enough to sear. I felt it like it was my own, a surge of savage protectiveness that made my wolf bare her teeth. He'll use our son as leverage, Trevor continued, voice low and lethal. He'll demand I step down, hand him the crown, or watch Ronald suffer. If I refuse, Marcus kills him, eliminates the direct heir, and throws the succession into chaos. Either way, the Northern Territories fracture. I shook my head numbly. He wouldn't hurt a child. He would hurt mine, Trevor said. Especially mine. The mate bond, dormant but never gone, flared bright and wild, snapping through me like lightning. For years it had been a faint ache, muffled behind walls I'd built myself. Now, standing in this tent with our son's life laid out in ink and strategy on the table between us, every brick cracked. Trevor's hand shot out, wrapping around my wrist. The contact was electric. Power surged up my arm, flooding my chest. Fear, fury, love, terror. His emotions tangled with mine until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Feel it, he said roughly. Feel what I feel when I think of him in Marcus's hands. Images crashed through me, not clear pictures but impressions. Ronald's small body dragged, his bright laugh broken into screams, the scent of his fear choking the air. My knees buckled. Trevor caught me with his other arm, hauling me against his chest. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't fight the bond. I let it rise. I let that invisible tether between us swell and thrum and snap fully into place, the way it had the night we first mated under the full moon. Pain and comfort and raw power poured through it in equal measure. We have to protect him, I whispered against his shirt, my fingers curling in the leather at his sides. Trevor, we can't let Marcus get anywhere near him. His answer was a sound more growl than word. I felt his body shift under my hands, muscles bunching, bones threatening to rearrange. His eyes went bright, pupils slitting, canines lengthening just enough to catch the lantern light. Anyone who tries to touch our son, he said, the alpha in him rolling through every syllable, dies. The air in the tent thickened, heavy with the force of his power. It pressed against my skin, against my wolf, demanding submission. But it didn't frighten me, not the way it used to. The bond turned it into heat instead, into fierce, aching certainty. He would kill for us, for Ronald, for me. He already had, I realized. I lifted my head and met his gaze. Gold burned there, terrible and beautiful. What do you need me to do? I asked. His grip on my wrist loosened, then shifted down to lace our fingers together, still rough, still possessive, but different. Not a shackle. A claim. A partnership. Stay close, he said. Do exactly as I say. And when the time comes, don't run. I thought of 7 years of fleeing shadows, of building a life on fear. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees like distant howling. For him, I said, meaning Ronald, meaning us. I won't. Trevor's answering smile was sharp and savage, a predator baring his teeth. Good, he murmured. Because my brother has started a war he doesn't understand. He squeezed my hand once, then released it and turned back to the table, already shifting pieces on the map. The Alpha King was in motion now, and for the first time since I'd left the fortress, I wasn't standing against him. I was standing at his side. We didn't have days. The attack came just after moonrise, in that thin slice of night when the tavern usually settled into soft snoring and creaking floorboards. I was in the kitchen banking the hearth, listening to the familiar sounds of Millhaven sleeping, when the air shifted. The first warning was the wind going still. No leaves rustling, no fox cries from the tree line. Just a sudden, heavy silence that made my wolf lift her head inside me and bare her teeth. Then I caught it, the sour stink of rogues on the wind. Unwashed fur, old blood, the acrid tang of desperation. It hit the back of my throat like poison. I dropped the poker. "Trevor," I whispered, even though he wasn't in the room. His answer came a heartbeat later, not in words but in the bond, an electric jolt of readiness, of command snapping into place. "Outside," someone shouted, the sound cut short by a snarl. I ran. By the time I burst through the front door, the street was chaos. Torchlight flickered over stone and dirt and fur. Trevor's warriors were already shifting, clothes ripping as their wolves exploded free. Massive shapes collided in the dark, our pack's disciplined fighters against a tide of lean, ragged rogues pouring in from the tree line. There were at least 20, maybe more. My heart seized. Ronald. He was upstairs, asleep, alone. A huge gray wolf slammed into the tavern wall beside me, teeth snapping inches from my arm. Trevor's beta Garrick hit him from the side, sending both wolves rolling. Blood spattered across the doorframe. "Lillian?" Garrick's voice tore through my mind on the pack link, rough and urgent. "Shift or get inside, now." Fear fought with instinct. I hadn't shifted fully since the night I ran from the fortress. Part of me had been afraid that if I let my wolf out, she'd sprint straight back to Trevor, Bond dragging us home. But our pup was upstairs. I didn't think again. Bones cracked, skin burned. The world lurched as my body reshaped itself. The familiar agony turned ecstasy of shifting, ripping a howl from my throat. When the ground steadied, I stood on 4 paws instead of 2. Everything sharpened. The night burst into 1,000 scents and sounds. I smelled each wolf, each drop of blood, each spark from the torches. I heard Ronald's heartbeat upstairs, fast and fluttering, heard his small whimper through the floorboards. My Omega wolf was smaller than the others, white with silver streaks, built for speed more than brute strength. But she was still a wolf, still a mother, and someone had come into our den. I launched forward, taking up position beside Garrick at the tavern door. Rogues crashed against us, snapping and snarling, trying to force their way inside. Garrick's massive brown form took the brunt of it, his jaws snapping necks with brutal efficiency. I darted in and out at his flanks, hamstringing those who slipped past, tearing at throats when they turned their backs. For a few frantic minutes, we held the line. Then a rogue broke through. He was smaller than the others, quick and vicious, fur patchy over old scars. He ducked past Garrick's lunge, claws scrabbling on the stone as he bolted straight toward the tavern's side window. I turned, but another wolf slammed into me from the side, snapping at my throat. We went down in a tangle of fur and teeth. I tore free, leaving a line of blood on his muzzle, and spun just in time to see the smaller rogue hurl himself through the glass. The window shattered, a rain of sparkling shards. Ronald. I didn't even howl. I just ran, my paws barely touching the floor as I scrambled back inside, through the kitchen, up the narrow stairs. Behind me, I could hear the battle spilling further down the street, roars and howls and the crunch of bone echoing off stone. Upstairs, the scent of blood and fear hit me like a wall. The rogue was in the hall, halfway to Ronald's room, glass embedded in his flank. He turned at the sound of my claws on the boards, lips peeled back over blood-stained teeth. He expected an easy kill. An Omega. Small. Weak. He didn't expect a mother. I hit him with enough force to drive him into the opposite wall. We crashed together, rolling. He snapped at my ear, teeth grazing. I went for his throat and missed, pulling away before he could get a grip on my muzzle. He lunged for the door. For my pup. I didn't think. I didn't feel. I just moved. My jaws closed over his hind leg, bone crunching under my teeth. He yelped, stumbling, but still clawed forward, leaving a smear of blood on the floorboards. I dragged him back, muscles screaming, then jerked my head sharply to the side. Something tore, he screamed. The scent of his pain flooded the hallway, thick and hot. He twisted, desperate, jaws snapping blindly. His teeth nicked my shoulder. The sting barely registered. I lunged again, this time for his throat. I didn't miss. Warm copper flooded my mouth. His struggles slowed, stopped. When I let him go, he collapsed in a heap, chest rising once, twice, then not at all. My wolf stood over him, breath heaving, fur bristling, a growl still rumbling deep in my chest. "Mom?" The tiny, trembling voice behind the door cut through everything. I shifted back before I reached his room, the change tearing through me with clumsy urgency. My hands were bloody, my skin stinging with glass cuts and bites, but I didn't care. I shoved the door open. Ronald was huddled in the corner by his bed, half shifted in terror, ears pointed, claws digging into the floor, eyes blazing molten amber. His little body shook with sobs he was trying to choke down. "Mom," he gasped, the word warping around new teeth. There's fighting," I heard. "I know," I said, crossing the room in 2 strides. I dropped to my knees and pulled him into my arms, careful of claws and fur. He clung to me, burying his face in my neck. "Are we going to die?" he whispered. "No," I said instantly. The mate bond thrummed, echoing Trevor's iron certainty through my veins. "No, baby. We are not going to die. Your father is here." He stiffened a little at that. The king?" "Yes." I stroked his hair, already damp with sweat, already streaked with silver like Trevor's. "He's fighting for us right now." Another howl split the night, deeper and louder than the others, vibrating through the walls. Trevor. His power rolled over the village like thunder. Ronald shook harder. "I'm scared." "I know." I rocked him gently, the old lullaby rising to my lips before I could stop it, the same one Trevor used to hum against my hair after long days in the war room. "Moon above, guard our den. Stars alight, guide us when." I sang softly, voice shaking but steady enough, feeling the bond pulse in time with the words. Trevor was there on the other end, a steady, furious presence. Every time he tore into another wolf, I felt the sharp flare of it in my chest pain laced with grim satisfaction. Every time their jaws found his flesh, my skin burned. Minutes stretched like hours. The sounds of battle ebbed and surged. Snarls, yelps, the crash of bodies against stone. Ronald flinched at every thud, claws digging into my arms, but he didn't try to shift further. My voice and the bond held him just on the edge. Then, slowly, the noise began to thin. One last roar, a chorus of answering howls. Then, quiet. My heart hammered, its rhythm no longer synced to the rhythm of the fight. The bond hummed with exhaustion and iron determination, but no fresh spikes of pain. "Stay here," I told Ronald, easing back. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it unless you hear my voice. Understand?" His eyes were huge, wet, and glowing. "Are you coming back?" "I'll always come back." I kissed his forehead, right over the spot where his future crown would rest if he lived long enough to wear it. "Remember what I told you. Special things have to be careful." He nodded, swallowing hard. I slipped out, waiting until I heard the lock click, then shifted again. The dried blood on my skin pulled and cracked as my body changed, but the wolf hardly noticed. She was already moving. Down the stairs, through the ruined common room, shattered glass and overturned chairs crunching under my paws. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, one iron bracket bent almost in half. I stepped outside into the wreckage of Millhaven. Bodies lay scattered in the street, rogues mostly, their fur matted and dark. A few of Trevor's warriors shifted back even as I watched, staggering to their feet, bloody but alive. The air stank of copper and fear and wet fur. And there, in the center of it all, stood Trevor. He was in human form again, bare-chested, skin streaked with blood that wasn't all his. Scratches crisscrossed his shoulders and arms, one deep bite mark ruining the line of his collarbone. His hair hung in wild braids, some half torn. His amber eyes glowed in the torchlight. At his feet lay a massive black wolf, too big and muscled to be anything but Marcus. He was unconscious, flanks rising and falling shallowly, fur torn in a dozen places. One ear was ragged, half bitten away. Blood pooled beneath his muzzle. Trevor looked up as I padded closer. For a heartbeat, our eyes met his wild, mine still shining with the remnants of fear, and the bond flooded warm. "It's over," he said, voice rough, ragged. He wasn't talking about the fight. Not just the fight. I shifted, standing naked and shaking in the cold air, not caring who saw. Ronald, alive. He took 2 steps forward, close enough that I could feel his heat. His hand lifted, like he wanted to touch my face, then dropped halfway. "I felt you. Upstairs." "I killed one," I said numbly. "At the stairs." His gaze flicked to the blood on my skin, something like pride sparking through the exhaustion in his eyes. "Good." We stood there in the ruined street, surrounded by dead enemies and wounded allies, the village we'd called home for 7 years broken and bloodied around us. "What happens now?" I whispered. Trevor looked down at Marcus, then back at me. His expression hardened into something unyielding. "Now," he said. "We're going home." The capital had always existed in my mind as a looming idea rather than a real place, a distant fortress of stone and steel where decisions were made that crushed small lives like mine. Riding toward it with my son between us made it feel even more impossible. We left Millhaven at dawn the morning after the attack, smoke still curling from the ruined roofs. Trevor's warriors moved like a dark tide around us, a shifting ring of leather and fur and watchful eyes. Ronald rode in front of Trevor on his massive black warhorse, small hands fisted in the reins, back straight with a seriousness that didn't match his wide, eager eyes. "Is the fortress bigger than the whole village?" Ronald asked before we'd cleared the last cottage. "Much bigger," Trevor said, adjusting his grip so Ronald sat more securely. "You could fit Millhaven inside the main courtyard and still have room for training grounds." Ronald twisted to look up at him, eyes bright. "Will I get a sword?" "When you're older." "How old?" Trevor's mouth twitched. "Old enough to hold it without dropping it on your foot." Ronald considered this gravely, then nodded. "I can practice not dropping things. I hardly ever drop anything now. Right, Mom?" I forced a smile. "Hardly ever," I said, ignoring the memory of 3 shattered mugs in the last week alone. The road wound down from the mountains in a series of sharp, narrow turns. Mist clung to the trees, the air crisp with pine and the faint tang of blood still lingering on Trevor's warriors. Every time a branch snapped in the forest, my shoulders tightened. Every time a bird took off suddenly, my wolf lifted her head, ready to fight. But the attack didn't come. Day bled into day, 5 of them in total. Each one stretched thin with a quiet tension that never fully eased. During the day, I watched Trevor with Ronald. I'd always imagined he would be a distant father, strict, imposing, more king than man. Instead, I saw patience. Real patience, the kind that didn't crack even when Ronald asked the same question 3 times in different words. "Do I have to be king when you die?" Ronald asked on the second afternoon, as we rode through a valley where the grass grew long and golden. "If you want to be," Trevor said, "it will be your right. But a good king chooses duty. He isn't forced into it. What if I don't want it?" Trevor was quiet for a moment, gaze fixed on the horizon. "Then we'll find a different path," he said at last. "There are many ways to serve the pack. Being heir doesn't mean you owe them your entire life. It just means you have a choice others don't." Ronald frowned thoughtfully. "I want to see it first," he decided. "The fortress. The pack. Then I'll know." "That's fair," Trevor said. Later, when we stopped to water the horses, I watched Trevor kneel behind Ronald and braid his hair. His big hands moved with surprising gentleness, dividing and weaving the dark strands with familiar ease. He tied off the end with a strip of leather, then pressed his thumb to the small slice of silver already threading through the dark. "In the capital," he said, "young alphas wear their braids like this when they begin training." Ronald craned his neck. "So everyone will know?" "That you're important," Trevor said. "That you're mine." Our son's chest puffed up, pride warring with a flicker of nerves in his eyes. I saw that too. Trevor saw everything. At night, after Ronald fell asleep wrapped in furs near the fire, the distance between Trevor and me shrank inch by inch. The first night, we sat on opposite sides of the flames, shadows flickering over his face as he stared into the embers. The bond hummed, a low, steady throb in my chest, but I kept my arms wrapped tightly around myself, afraid that if I reached toward that warmth, I wouldn't be able to stop. "I should have told the council about you sooner," he said quietly, voice roughened by smoke and exhaustion. "Given you a name and a place no one could question." "They would have questioned everything," I said. "A nameless Omega from the kitchens as their queen? They would have torn me apart. That was my fear," he admitted. "I thought I had more time to prepare them. To prepare you." He huffed a humorless laugh. "Seems I miscalculated." "So did I said. "About everything." On the second night, he told me about the suitors. "The council kept pushing names at me," he said, leaning back on one hand, the other turning a twig over in his fingers. "Daughters of old families, widows with political alliances. They saw my obsession with finding you as weakness, a liability they could fix by tying me to someone acceptable." "And you refused," I said, though the bond already thrummed with the truth of it. "Every time." He looked at me across the fire, amber eyes catching the light. "Some bonds you can't replace. Not even for a crown." Guilt twisted in my gut, sharp and familiar. I thought you already had, I admitted, when I heard you with Marcus. When no one came after me. I told myself you'd chosen the pack over me. Over us. That it was easier to believe the stories about kings than the things you whispered in the dark. And now? He asked softly. Now the mate bond stretched between us along the road, through the smoke, over the sleeping form of our son. Now I'd seen him throw himself into a street full of rogues to protect a boy he hadn't known he had. Now I'd watched him walk away from an easy political solution because his wolf refused to release me. Now I don't know how to forgive myself, I said. He didn't answer right away. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks up into the night. Ronald murmured in his sleep, turning over, the braided strand of his hair catching the light. On the fourth night, the wind picked up. We made camp in a hollow sheltered by rocks, the sky above clear and jeweled with stars. The warriors formed a loose ring around us, some already half asleep, others taking first watch. Trevor and I ended up closer than usual, the circle tighter because of the terrain. When I sat, my knee brushed his. I meant to pull back. I didn't. He noticed. Of course he noticed. His gaze dropped to the small point of contact, then rose to my face. I'm still angry, he said, voice low enough that it barely stirred the air between us. That hasn't gone away. I know. The words tasted like ash. You have every right. You took 7 years from me, he continued. From Ronald. From us. He didn't look away, didn't soften the blow. There are moments I will never get back. Firsts I only get to imagine. That doesn't vanish because we survived one battle. I swallowed hard. I didn't expect it to vanish. But, he said, and the word cut through my spiraling guilt like a blade through fog. I understand why you ran. My head snapped up. He exhaled slowly, eyes tracking the firelight. I've spent years being feared, he said. Being obeyed because I can break necks and decide who eats and who starves. It's easy to forget that when I walk into a room, most people don't see a man. They see a weapon. I saw both, I said quietly. That was the problem. I knew exactly what you were capable of. And when you heard that conversation, you believed the weapon over the man. His gaze met mine, steady and unflinching. That's my failure as much as yours, Lillian. I gave you my heart, but I never showed you what it meant for a king to have a mate. I never proved that you could trust my choices, even when you didn't understand them. The bond flared hot in my chest, a painful, hopeful ache. You shouldn't have to prove that, I whispered. Maybe not. A small, tired smile touched his mouth, but I intend to. For a long moment, we just sat there, the fire snapping softly, the camp settling around us. The air between us buzzed with unspoken apologies and questions that didn't yet have answers. Then Trevor reached across the space and took my hand. His fingers were rough and calloused, warm against my cold skin. The moment our palms touched, the mate bond surged, snapping from a low hum to a bright, desperate thrum. His emotions crashed into me: anger. Yes, still simmering, but layered with relief, with longing, with a love so fierce it stole my breath. I'm still furious with you, he said, thumb brushing over the inside of my wrist where my pulse jumped. That's not going to vanish overnight. I wouldn't believe you if you said it did, I managed. But I'm more furious with the world that made you think running was your only choice, he continued. With myself, for not giving you something solid enough to stand on when everything else shook. Tears burned at the back of my eyes. Trevor, he tugged me gently, closing the last of the distance, until I was close enough to see the faint golden flecks in his irises, the tired lines at the corners, close enough to feel his breath on my face. I can't change the years we lost, he said, but I can decide what we do with the ones ahead. The bond burned between us now, hot and demanding, not the calm thread of survival, but the roaring river it had been the night we first mated. I felt myself lean toward it, toward him, almost without conscious thought. When he pulled me into his arms, I didn't resist. His mouth found mine with a kind of desperate care, a contradiction that only made my heart ache more. The kiss wasn't gentle, not exactly, but it wasn't punishing either. It was claiming, apologizing, mourning, promising all at once. Every ounce of anger and love and grief poured through that single point of contact. My hands fisted in his shirt. He cupped the back of my neck, holding me like something precious and breakable he'd almost lost forever. We didn't complete the mating. The mark on my shoulder still burned with the echo of that long-ago night, and both of us knew that binding it anew would change everything in ways we weren't ready for. Not yet. But when we finally broke apart, breathless and shaken, I knew one thing with a certainty that settled deep into my bones. Whatever waited at the Capitol Council judgment, political games, the lingering shadow of Marcus's betrayal, we would face it together. The bond, frayed and battered, was no longer a thin, distant ache. It was a living thing again. The Capitol looked like something out of one of the old stories I used to whisper to Ronald by firelight. Impossibly huge, impossibly distant, more myth than stone. From the last rise in the road, I saw it spread across the valley. Massive walls of gray rock, banners snapping in the wind from high towers, the fortress itself rising at the center, like a mountain carved into sharp angles. Smoke rose from 100 chimneys. The air thrummed with the scents of wolves, metal, and too many people pressed into one place. Ronald's hand tightened around mine where we rode side by side, his pony dwarfed by Trevor's warhorse. "Mom," he breathed, eyes wide. "There are so many." "Stay close," I told him, though I was the one who wanted to hide behind someone larger. We reached the outer gates at midday. The horns sounded before we were even in sight. Long, low notes that rolled across the valley like thunder. By the time we passed under the iron portcullis, the courtyard inside was packed. Thousands. Wolves in human form lined the walls and crowded every available space. Warriors in leather and steel, elders in heavy cloaks, children peeking from behind their parents' legs. Faces I'd never seen and some I'd only glimpsed years ago in the fortress corridors. All of them staring. At Trevor. At me. At Ronald. He shifted in his saddle, shoulders drawing in. "They're looking at us," he whispered. "They're looking at him," I murmured back, nodding toward Trevor. "You're just new." His fingers slid from mine, then grabbed again, tighter. I squeezed back. We rode into the center of the courtyard. Trevor lifted a hand, and the noise, a low, rising murmur, fell into silence so complete I could hear the flutter of banners overhead. His warriors fanned out, forming a loose circle around us. Garrick took his place at Trevor's right. I felt more than saw the council elders gathering near the steps of the fortress, their scents old and sharp. Trevor swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, then turned and reached for Ronald. For a heartbeat, my son hesitated. Then he let himself be lifted. I watched Trevor set him on his shoulders, big hands braced firmly around Ronald's legs. The image struck something deep inside me. The Alpha King bearing his heir for all to see, and yet there was something almost boyish in the way Ronald grabbed at his braids to steady himself. "Head high," Trevor murmured to him. "You're not prey." Ronald took a breath and straightened. Trevor turned to the crowd, the full force of his alpha presence rolling out like a wave. The air thickened with it. My wolf lowered herself instinctively, but the bond kept me upright at his side. "This," Trevor said, his voice carrying to the farthest edge of the courtyard without effort, "is my son." The words hit harder than any horn. "Ronald," he continued, "son of Lillian, my true mate, blood of my blood, heir to the Northern Territories." A ripple surged through the gathered wolves, shock, excitement, disbelief. Ronald's silver-streaked hair caught the light, his eyes blazing amber as he stared down at the sea of faces. Trevor's gaze swept the crowd, hard and unyielding. "Any who wish to challenge his claim," he said, "may face me in the circle." Silence. Not cautious, not hesitant, absolute. The kind of silence that said no one here was suicidal enough to step forward. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Trevor's hand found mine briefly, fingers squeezing once before he turned toward the fortress steps. The path opened before us, the pack parting like water around stone. As we passed, wolves bowed their heads not just to Trevor, but to Ronald. And some, to my shock, to me. The council chamber smelled like old wood, ink, and the sour tang of politics. I'd only been there once before, as a servant carrying wine trays. Now I stood at Trevor's side, Ronald fixed securely between us, while the elders took their seats in a semicircle. Their eyes weighed, everything my plain dress, the calluses on my hands, the faint mark of Trevor's bite on my shoulder, the way Ronald's fingers tangled with mine. One of them, Elder Hadron, cleared his throat. His hair was whiter than I remembered, but his voice was still dry and sharp. "We are pleased the king has found an heir," he said. "Some of us only wish we had been informed sooner of—" His gaze flicked to me. "Certain developments." Whispers stirred. Low, disapproving. My wolf shrank, but I held my chin up. "I informed you the moment it became safe," Trevor said, not bothering with courtly niceties. "Until then, knowledge of my mate and heir was a weapon I refused to hand to my enemies. Enemies like your brother," another elder said, lips thin, "whom you allowed too close for too long." "Whom I have dealt with," Trevor replied. "Which brings us to our next order of business." He motioned. The doors at the back opened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus shuffled in between two guards, wrists bound in heavy iron. He looked smaller than he had in Millhaven's street, paler, leaner, black hair matted and dull. The scars from his fight with Trevor were still healing, puckered lines of angry red across his exposed arms. His eyes, though, were still sharp, still dangerous. They swept the room, lingering on Ronald, then on me. His mouth curled, a humorless half-smile. "So this is the game," he said. "Parade the pup and the kitchen girl in front of the council and hope they forget what you've done." Trevor's hand tightened around mine under the table. "For crimes of treason," Trevor said, his voice cutting through Marcus's mockery like a blade. "For organizing an army of rogues against your own pack. For the attempted kidnapping and planned murder of my heir. I declare Marcus, former son of King Ryden, stripped of rank and name." Gasps. One elder swore under his breath. "You will be exiled beyond the territories," Trevor continued, eyes never leaving his brother's face. "If you return, the penalty will be death, immediate and unquestioned." Marcus laughed, actually laughed. "You always were sentimental," he said. "Killing me now would be cleaner. Exile just gives me time to sharpen my teeth." He turned his gaze on Ronald again, slow and deliberate. My son flinched but didn't look away. "This isn't over, little prince," Marcus said softly. "Kings fall, heirs die, pack loyalties shift with the wind. One day, your father won't be there to stand in front of you." I half rose, a growl vibrating in my chest. Trevor squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt, a silent command. "Take him," Trevor said. The guards dragged Marcus away. He didn't fight. He didn't need to. His words hung in the air like smoke long after the doors shut. The elders muttered among themselves. Some looked angry, some frightened, some calculating, but none of them questioned the sentence. When the council finally dismissed, my legs felt unsteady. The day had stretched into something endless. Back in the royal chambers, the same suite I'd fled in terror 7 years ago, the past and present collided so hard I had to stop just inside the doorway. Nothing had changed. The same great bed, the same balcony overlooking the training grounds, the same carved wolf's head above the hearth. The last time I'd seen these walls, my heart had been pounding with the certainty that I was about to be killed. Now Ronald stood at the foot of the bed, staring at it like it was some enormous beast. "Do we really sleep here?" he whispered. "For now," I said, "until we decide what's best." He nodded, solemn. "Can I see the training grounds tomorrow? If your father agrees. Can I?" Trevor ruffled his hair. "Questions later," he said. "Bath first, food second, training third, heirs rules." Ronald rolled his eyes but smiled, some of the tension finally easing from his shoulders. A servant appeared to lead him to the adjoining room, where a hot bath and soft clothes waited. He glanced back at us once, then disappeared. The room quieted. I turned slowly, taking in every familiar detail: the corner where Trevor used to stack his maps, the chair where he'd once fallen asleep mid-sentence, the window where I'd watched the moon rise over the walls. Trevor closed the door. "I thought I'd never see this place again," I said. "I thought I'd never see you in it again," he replied. He crossed the room with unhurried steps, as if giving me time to bolt if I chose. I didn't. When he stopped in front of me, close enough that I could count the new lines around his eyes, my heart pounded so hard I half expected him to hear it. He lifted his hands, placing them gently on either side of my face. His thumbs brushed my cheekbones, rough skin soft in its touch. "I'm not asking you to forget the fear," he said quietly. "I know what I am, what I've done, what this place meant to you when you left it." Tears pricked my eyes. "It meant death," I whispered. "It meant loss. It meant losing you before anyone else could take you away." "I can't change what you heard," he said, "or the years that came after. But I can promise you this. I will never give you reason to think you are anything but safe with me again." The bond swelled, hot and aching, responding to each word like a touch. "I want the pack to see you as I do," he continued. "Not as a problem to be managed or a scandal to be buried. As my mate, their Luna, the woman who kept my son alive and strong despite every obstacle I threw in her path." My laugh came out wet and shaky. "You make it sound noble. It was mostly terror and stubbornness." "I've ruled half my life on terror and stubbornness," he said. "Seems fitting my queen would share my best traits." Queen. The word hung between us, huge and fragile. "I'm asking you," Trevor said, his gaze steady and open in a way that still unnerved me, "to complete the bond again. To stand beside me in front of the pack and let them see that this was always fated, no matter how far you ran. To give Ronald a home that isn't built on fear." My throat closed. "And if I fail?" I whispered. "You will," he said simply. "So will I. We're wolves, not myths. But we'll fail together. That's the difference." I searched his face for any hint of doubt, any crack in the resolve. Found none. "Lillian," he said, "my name a rough caress. Do you trust me enough to try?" 7 years ago, I'd answered that question with my feet. Now I answered it with a single word. Yes. The relief that crashed through the bond from his side nearly took me to my knees. He leaned in, his lips brushing the mark on my shoulder, teeth scraping lightly over the scarred skin as the old bond flared and then surged, hungry and bright. When he bit down, sealing it anew, the world disappeared in light and heat and the dizzying sensation of falling and flying at once. His joy, his fear, his love, his ruthless determination to keep us safe, all of it flooded me, overwhelming and right. I clung to him, to us, as the bond locked into place. Outside, somewhere in the vast fortress, the pack howled as the moon rose. Inside, in the room I'd fled as a terrified girl, I finally became what I was always meant to be. Not a servant, not a runaway Omega. Luna, mate, mother of the air, home. 3 months later, the fortress felt less like a cage and more like a heartbeat. I stood on the battlements in the cool evening air, fingers curled around the rough stone, watching the courtyard below. Training was nearly over for the day. Wolves in human form moved through familiar patterns. Blades flashing, shields lifting, barked commands echoing against the walls. In the center of it all, Ronald faced Garrick with a wooden sword. Trevor's beta circled him slowly, testing, prodding, never quite attacking. Ronald's stance was clumsy but determined, feet too close together, shoulders too tense, but his eyes were sharp. Every time Garrick feinted, Ronald adjusted, remembering, learning. "Again," Garrick called. "This time keep your weight on the balls of your feet. You're an alpha, not a tree." Ronald scowled but obeyed, shifting his balance. When Garrick lunged, Ronald parried barely, the sound of wood striking, wood floating faintly up to me. Pride swelled in my chest so hard it almost hurt. The acceptance ceremony had sealed everything. I could still feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on my skin, the circle of the pack ringing the sacred field, the moon high above. Trevor had stood at my side, our hands joined, the wound on my shoulder still fresh from the renewed mark. Ronald had been between us in ceremonial armor too big for him, the breastplate gleaming silver, the wolf sigil catching the moonlight. When Trevor lifted our joined hands and howled, the pack answered as one, the sound rolling over the hills like thunder. For the first time in my life, I hadn't wanted to hide from that sound. I'd wanted to join it. We spent the next month in the mountain lodge, not like the first time secret and stolen, but openly, as a family. The lodge sat above a lake so clear you could see the fish darting near the bottom. The days passed in a rhythm of training and rest, Ronald learning basic forms with Garrick on the grass, then collapsing between us by the fire at night while Trevor told him stories of our ancestors. Our son soaked everything up. Pack histories, battle tactics, the old songs that were rarely sung outside formal gatherings. He asked questions until his voice went hoarse, and still somehow found more the next day. But Trevor never let the weight of duty crush him. "You are heir because of your blood," he told Ronald one afternoon, as they skipped stones across the lake. "But what you do with that is yours to decide. A crown is a burden, not a chain. If you choose it with open eyes, not because anyone pushes you." "Even you?" Ronald asked, doubtful. "Especially me," Trevor said. Back at the fortress, the routine settled in. Lessons in the mornings, reading, strategy, history, training in the afternoons, sword, bow, claws, control. Evenings were ours. Sometimes we ate with the council, sometimes with the warriors in the great hall, sometimes alone in our chambers while Ronald recounted his day so dramatically we both ended up laughing. The threats never vanished completely. Rumors drifted in from the borderlands like smoke. Marcus was alive, as we'd known he would be, gathering rogues and the discontented in the wild spaces beyond our maps. Other packs watched with bright, hungry eyes, waiting to see if the northern territories would splinter under the strain of scandal and change. But Trevor didn't fracture. If anything, he grew more formidable with each challenge. Every time a rival alpha tested him in council, he met them with calm steel, and when they glanced at me, or at Ronald, looking for weakness, they found only strength. "My mate and my son don't make me softer," he said once, voice mild but eyes cold. "They give me more to fight for. Remember that when you consider where to place your loyalties." Watching him now from the battlements, I felt the truth of that down to my bones. The sun slid lower, painting the mountains in bands of gold and purple. In the courtyard, Garrick clapped Ronald on the shoulder, signaling the end of their session. My son dropped his sword, breathing hard, cheeks flushed with effort and pride. When he laughed at something Garrick said, the sound reached me even from this height, bright and free. Arms wrapped around my waist from behind, solid and familiar. I didn't startle anymore when that happened. My wolf simply leaned back into the warmth. "Your stance is improving," Trevor murmured against my hair. "Less flailing, more intent." "His or yours?" I asked. He huffed a quiet laugh. "His. Mine was always perfect." "Obviously," I said, rolling my eyes even as I smiled. He rested his chin on my shoulder, gaze following mine down to the courtyard. "I spent 7 years grieving you," he said softly. 7 years waking up to an empty bed, wondering which choices had driven you away. 7 years imagining a pup that might have been and trying not to hate you for taking him with you. Guilt flickered, the old familiar ache, but it didn't hollow me out like it once had. The bond carried more than sorrow now. It carried everything we'd rebuilt. "I know," I whispered. His hold on me tightened just slightly, just enough to make the promise feel physical. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have reason to run again," he said. "Not from me, not from this place, not from this pack." Below us, Ronald shifted. It still amazed me how quickly he could do it now, bones reshaping, skin rippling, armor gone in favor of fur and muscle. One heartbeat he was a boy, hair mussed, grinning at some joke Garrick had made. The next, a young wolf stood in his place, dark fur with streaks of silver, ears pricked, tail high. He threw back his head and howled. It wasn't a challenge or a call to war. It was pure, unrestrained happiness, echoing off the stone, answered by a few nearby wolves, and then, faintly, from the training fields beyond. My throat tightened. I pressed my hands over Trevor's, where they rested on my stomach, and let myself breathe it in the sound, the sight, the simple miracle of my son howling in joy instead of terror. I had spent 7 years running. 7 years building walls out of fear and calling them protection. 7 years convinced that love and safety could never live in the same place for someone like me. I'd been wrong. Some bonds are worth bleeding for. Some loves are stubborn enough to outlast silence, distance, and every mistake in between. Some families are written not just in blood, but in the choices we make to keep finding each other, again and again. I turned in Trevor's arms, tipping my face up to his. The fortress, the pack, the mountains, all of it blurred at the edges. His amber eyes stayed sharp. "I'm home," I said. It wasn't a question. It didn't need to be. He smiled, slow and real. "Yes," he said. "You are." The Silver Wolf Tavern still existed somewhere in memory. A crooked sign, a wobbly table by the window, the smell of bread and fear. But it felt distant now, a chapter closed. My life was here, on these walls, in this fortress, in the laughter echoing up from the courtyard and the steady arms wrapped around me, with my mate, with my son, with my pack. If you've stayed with me to this point in the story, tell me, where are you watching from? And what was your favorite moment in Lillian and Trevor's journey? Rate this story from 1 to 10, and let me know if you want more chapters in this world.